very dear to myself. It is, in my opinion, the confused understanding of what are the fundamentals of the Islamic economic system that generates different views and different stands and different fatwa here and there. And I think we need to look at the fundamentals and try to understand again what really is the Islamic economic system. And I identify it by its institutions, not by the generalities of either the objectives of a system like efficiency or equity or justice or that, and not also by the generalities of faith. What identifies a system, in my opinion, are the institutions, not really the faith, nor the general objectives. All systems, with no difference. Communists claimed that they were working for justice and equity, and they killed 30 million people in that process of applying justice their own way. The capitalist system is also based on justice and efficiency and aims for justice and efficiency. But again, the result was a lot more concentration of wealth and a lot more injustice in the application. So let's look at what identified the system, and in my understanding, in my opinion, in my experience, what identifies a system are its institutions. The institutions of the Islamic economic system are these 9 points. If we start with them, property rights. How do we deal with property rights? The relationship between the economic units, how are they based? The recognition of exchange and contracts as the fundamental way for interrelations between the economic units. Economic freedom is a third institution. The next one is the market structure in the Islamic economic system. Then the concept, the way we look at wealth and income. The legal system, how is it applied, and what legal system the system adopts. Then the role of the state or the government representing people, the role of the government in the system, and the ethical system that supports the economic system. And the last point is, in the Islamic economic system, the concept of mercy and caring for others. I try to discuss these 9, I wouldn't call them pillars, they are rather institutions. They are set of structures, either physical or non-physical, could be sometimes even in the hearts of the economic units, and could be also in the interrelations between units. So they are institutions rather than foundations or pillars. So when we look at the concept or the way we deal with the property rights, one, we do have in our system, and we do recognize 4 different kinds of properties, kinds of properties: the private property, public property, community property, and waqf. The, these different kinds of properties are, to a large extent, well defined in our Islamic system. And the boundaries between one and the other are also identified. The private property is the major one among all of them, and it is the main one, and we notice that it is the foundation, the indispensable background for many other obligations that come in the system, and also in the other aspects, the non-economic aspects of human life, including zakah being a religious obligation, and hajj requiring spending money for a certain objective defined, well defined, which is not non-economic objective again. So the exchange or relationship between the economic units are done through contracts, especially the exchange contract. The system of inheritance that relate to private property also. This is a system that is inculcated in the Islamic system in a special way and designed in a very detailed way by God only, as a matter of fact, by Allah in the Quran. Things in it that come from the hadith of the Prophet ﷺ are very small things, almost negligible, not related to the more applicable cases of inheritance, etc. With it, that relates to what can be owned and what cannot be owned, what is called in the Arabic literature al-mal or al-amwal. We usually define it as property, but again, it is well defined, as we will come to it later. So all these issues relate essentially to private ownership. Private ownership is very important. How does the Sharia define it? In fact, it is interesting to notice that it is an exclusive authority over a thing, of a person, of a human being, over a thing. So that exclusive authority means, one, you do whatever you like, and two, no one has right to interfere. So it is very important, and that relates, in fact, again, to the other institutions of the system. We see how they are intermingled together and how they play. The several institutions of the system, how they play together and in the hands of each other again. The idea of incomplete ownership is discussed in fiqh literature, but it's not really of much importance, except in certain areas. How do we apply zakah? How do we apply some other things, which again need to be understood in the proper way, because incomplete ownership is not really a full ownership. And there are different kinds of incomplete ownership that are detailed in our classical fiqh. How private property is acquired is very important. And we notice that it is not one of the ways of acquisition of property consent in a contract alone. Consent in a contract does not mean that we fulfill always in the contract justice. A contract may be oppressive, and yet it may have consent, because consent is a human action. And that human action may be given sometimes under different kind of circumstances. Some of them may be coercive, some of them may be under duress, some of them may be under difficulties, under pressure, etc., etc. So the consent, of course, is the basis of contracting, but not on everything. The other element, which is more important than consent, is that whether a contract fulfills the conditions of justice. If it does not fulfill the conditions of justice, then even with consent, the contract is either avoidable or is changeable. So we look at how a private property is acquired through exchange contract. We will discuss them in a moment. Exchange contract, you give and take in them, each person, and they require two persons or economic units. Could be through inheritance. And inheritance gives us an insight in the concept of ownership. No matter how much the private ownership is exclusive, in a sense that no one has right to interfere in it, including the government. And also, on the other hand, that you have full authority over what you own, even if you do crazy thing. Could be. The example of crazy thing, for instance, Larry King, at the age of 73, married a girl of 23 years old, and he gave her a lot, millions of his wealth to accept him in that marriage. Well, this is definitely crazy, and but it is that it represents or it expresses the full authority of a person over what a person owns. So you cannot really prevent it, even though it is, we judge it morally as an inappropriate action, but you cannot really prevent it. Same thing, if a Muslim does similar, and there are Muslims who did something similar to that, you can't really say their heirs, his children. Larry King has older children, much older than the girl he married. The girl who accepted him in marriage. So, but yet, they have no right at all to prevent him from what he did. And that expresses the degree of freedom that you have, the degree of authority that one has over what one owns. So this here, inheritance, gives us some other thing which is very important. This is expressed by a statement by Abu Bakr, where he said that, Abu Bakr as-Siddiq radiallahu anhu, when he said that God had made a charity on you. He gave you a charity. That is, at the time of death, when you feel death is coming close, you may dispose for any good objective for a maximum of 1/3 of your property. Now, what is the nuance that this statement gives is very important. And this importance is expressed in the inheritance system itself. As a matter of fact, private ownership is defined as an ownership as long as one is alive. And once a person dies, who becomes the owner? The owner becomes God, Allah. So the property goes back to the giver. In other words, that this is a full ownership with full authority, but as long as you are there. But when you are not there, you cannot have any authority, in fact, over that property, to the extent that in order to have any freedom of action to use any part of it, Abu Bakr expressed it, God gave you a gift by allowing you. In principle, you should not be allowed, but this is a gift from God at that moment, just to allow you to gain more reward. So it relates, of course, to the concept of vicegerency. It is, you are authorized by God, and this authorization is only while you are alive. But once a person dies, under the old Western systems, in fact, no exclusion at all, including Judaism and Christianity, and the old Western system, Western legal systems, you can have authority after you die on your property. So you are dead under the ground for 10 years, and you put in your last will, do not give property X or Y or Z, or do not give to my child X or Y or Z until he becomes of the age of so and so, or until if he marries this girl or she marries that boy, or anything. And you can even give it to a non-human being to dispose of it in that way. Authority under, or the private ownership under the Western system goes beyond death. In other words, it allows a person who is underground, maybe for over than 10 years, to still dispose of his property by the statement he wrote before he died. The Islamic system does not allow that. The understanding of the private ownership, you are vicegerent of God, and it is given by God, not by the state or the society. It's given by God. As long as you own, you are there. But once a person is no more there, it goes back to God, and God distributes it the way He chooses. Of course, discussion in detail, this way that He chooses has a lot of mercy, has a lot of care of the deceased and of the close kin of that deceased. Yes, it is distributed, as we know in the Quran, to the closest person to that one. So the inheritance gives us that understanding of the right of ownership. The entitlement right is a very important expression of the concept of the private ownership in Islam. If you own a thing, you own anything that is generated by what you own. In a simple example, if you own a cow and the cow gives birth to a baby cow, it's you who owns the baby cow, nobody else, and no one may have a claim on it. Whatever you own, a lender, for instance, has no claim on the outcome of the borrower's action and borrower's properties. This is part. So the entitlement right is applied to its fullness in the Islamic law, or in the concept of private ownership. You can acquire from free property with your own resources, but you cannot acquire unjustly again, what is called ihya al-mawat, or anything that is free property. You go to the river with a pitcher and take a pitcher full of water, and that becomes your own, definitely, and no one at all may have any right on the water in that pitcher that you took, and it is yours exclusively, but you have no right to bring a pump on and put it on the river and take that quantity of water that is used unjustly, unfairly. So this is also important in the concept of acquisition of property. Compensation of injury, whether body injury or economic injury. Of course, that is another way of acquisition of property. And that is also defined in Sharia, which is called the civil liability. Civil liability is not left to the opinion of the court. While the opinion of the court is definitely important, but more important in it is to value in reality, part of it, for instance, all human beings are equal. So if in body injury, someone is injured who is rich, who has high income, and another person has similar injury who is poor and have low income, in American courts today, they estimate the compensation in a very different way. The poor guy will get a small amount, and the rich guy will get a big amount. That's by definition, because it is estimated on his expected income in the lifetime. Whereas in our system, in the tort system, this is called tort system, when it is body injury, human beings are equal. You can't say that one, the hand of X is more valuable than the hand of Y. No, they are equal, exactly. So you notice these are the exclusive ways of acquiring private property. Consent in a contract alone is not sufficient to add. So if you consent in a contract on lending, a loan contract, consent to give an increment above the amount of the principal, that consent is discarded and the increment is not due, because it does also violate the entitlement right. The second institution is the exchange and contract. I like to begin with a little story which is interesting, and it was, though, after revelation, but before the creation of what is called the first Islamic government in Medina. The Prophet ﷺ was an individual, one human being living in Mecca. So there were an exchange contract between two persons, and happened to be one was foreigner, and foreigners, of course, were ill-treated in Mecca by the Meccans, because these are what they call them. They have a special name for them, which I forgot here. The foreigners. They are not. They have no equal rights. And the Meccans, especially a lord of the lords of Mecca, was the contract between them, and the lord of Mecca did not pay. So that man stood in around the Kaaba and was calling, "Give me my right. Who is going to help me to give me my right?" So in a matter of a joke, they meant it as really to degrade the case and the person, and also the Prophet ﷺ. So they told him, and the right was on Abu Jahl. Abu Jahl was the debtor. So some of those crazy people sitting there told him, "Well, go to that man who was praying then, the Prophet Muhammad ﷺ. He will get you your right from Abu Jahl," and the arch enemy of him. And when after he finished prayer, he actually talked to him, and the Prophet went to Abu Jahl and forced him to pay the right of the other person. In other words, forced him to implement أوفوا بالعقود. Although it came يا أيها الذين آمنوا, but the call also applies to everybody. And he forced him to do that by his moral pressure on him. It is said in the story that Abu Jahl was asked, why do you obey Muhammad, and he's your enemy, you never obey him in anything, and why in this case? So he told him, I was really afraid, that I thought I may, something may destroy me in that. So the idea here is, يا أيها الذين آمنوا أوفوا بالعقود. Exchange, contracts are to be implemented. You make a contract, you implement them. Contracts are defined in our fiqh that they are founded exchange contract, founded on what is called al-shuh or al-mashahha. What is al-mashahha in economics? Is self-interest maximization. So exchange contract, I argue with you, I negotiate with you, the price, the quality of the goods, everything. And of course, deliveries and etc. and payment, all these conditions, and I negotiate them on the basis that I'm defending my own best interest, and you are also defending your own best interest. That is in contracts that require two wills. Of course, there are contracts that do not require two wills, like a gift. Gift is also a contract, like a last will. So like a charity, giving charity to a poor guy or a girl or whatever. So that does not require, this kind of contract does not require two wills and only one will, but contracts that require two wills are based on negotiation. By the way, including marriage contract, which requires two will, and each party must defend own right and maximize own benefit from the marriage contract. This is, of course, natural. So they are based on that. The exchange is a main way for acquisition. Others, as we discussed in the other 5 ways, and exchange contract are to be fulfilled. Once a contract is done, it is to be fulfilled. Now, exchange contract that require two wills, do they create value? I believe the answer is yes, and not only yes, it is yes, definitely. Not only I, all economists today also have the same kind of argument, that a contract would not be done, would not reach the point of signing it or accepting it or consent to it, unless what you take out of this contract is better to you than what you give. And that applies on both parties. Say in sale, both parties have the same. So it does increase the utility of both parties. To me, the jacket I buy is better to me than the 100 lira. And to the seller, the 100 lira is better to him than the jacket. So we both increased our wealth by the sale contract once we reach that. And that is, again, another expression of freedom of will. Under freedom of will, exchange contract gives, of course, the consent in the contract, create added value in the economy. Freedom, we spoke about it, it is very important. It is an absolute authority over what you own. No one has right to interfere with it. But it is expressed in the Quran by roving on the earth and have sustenance from it so much. Restrictions in general are something that the Sharia and our religions, the ethics of it, hate. The expression of that is when the Prophet ﷺ made the market. He said, this market, there will be no restrictions on it. No one will have any right to make any restriction. And he also said that there must be no taxes on it. Okay. So probably eliminating the added, value-added tax might be better than existing it, unless there is necessity. And this is part of it. In fact, we have several statements in the sayings of the Prophet ﷺ that generally hate taxes. So taxes are only taken out of necessity, and if there is no necessity, there should be no taxes as much as possible. The equality under law is part of freedom also, because you are free to negotiate, to discuss, to contract on your own will, and you have equal will compared to any other. Of course, economic freedom also entails economic responsibility. The major responsibility is you are required to spend on yourself. You are required to sustain yourself economically, and not only yourself, but also a set of persons that are close to you if they have no resources of sustenance of their own. So you are required family, and it is detailed in our fiqh, and also in fact derived from the Quran. لينفق ذو سعة من سعته. It's clear in that. You are also required to contribute to the society. All individuals and individual economic units in the economy are also required to contribute to the society. This contribution to society could be sometimes based on voluntary moral impetus inside the person, or it could be also implemented by law with certain expressions of it. So with all that, the Prophet ﷺ stepped in Medina upon Hijrah, and one of the early things that he did was to create a market. So he said, this is where we are going to trade. No one has any right to prevent anyone. He put set of rules that assure freedom and assure equality of people. For instance, don't go outside the market and reach out to producers before they come to the market. Allow them to come to the market and see the conditions, and then they will sell. Don't be an agent, a local agent for an external supplier, because let him pay, let the external supplier pay for the cost of information. Come to the market and see what are the conditions in the market that is paid for the cost of information. Don't give him that information in advance. Of course, when he said there should be no taxes, no one can be prevented from this market, and no one can be forced in or out in it. So all these give us the foundation of the market, and of course, so our fiqh al-mu'amalat, all of it is based on contracting, and contracting means that you contract essentially in the market. Also, we do recognize that the market does not give the best results at all times. So the market definitely may leave some people with low income and some of them with high income. What do we do here? This is where another institution comes, which is the caring and the mercy, that we will discuss it. But the market creates a fair distribution of income, and that distribution of income is accepted as a foundation, as a basis. Now, on that basis, if there is injustice, which is from different angles, someone become low in consumption, in income, in whatever, that is the where the concept, the institution of mercy and care for others comes in. The education, for instance, whose responsibility is education? Throughout our fiqh, with no exception, your parents, you are responsible. If you bring children to this life, you are responsible to teach them not only their religion, but also to teach them how to earn their own living. And we have numerous examples, unlimited example from the practices of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam and his companion after him everywhere, and throughout our fiqh. If you bring children to this life, you are required to educate them to the extent that they can live religiously and they can live economically, both of them together. It's not the government responsibility nor the society responsibility. When it comes what you said to awqaf, that is out of the institution of mercy and care for others. We do care for others. You know the difference between mercy and care. Mercy when there is a stress on the other, but caring when there is no need to be in a stressful situation. So mercy is when a person, for instance, doesn't have enough income to live on, then you help him. But caring about others simply because when you notice that someone is on the low side, yet the basics are supplied to him or her, then where you care for others. So both of them are there and are part of that institution. The Quran, in a clear way, sometimes says it, that whether he may be poor or rich, it is none of your business. إن يكن غنيا أو فقيرا الله أولى بهما. It's none of your business. That's a God job. Don't interfere in it. So it's not only because of poverty or richness that, okay, then we need to change the institution of market. No. The institution of market works, and works, of course, through freedom, and freedom of contracting, freedom of exchange. And I wouldn't ask a person in the market to pay other than the market price, as we have many incidences by the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, to the extent that the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, when he was asked to impose pricing on certain goods, he refused. And as explained by some ulama later, his refusal was based on the concept that if there is a shortage of supply, definitely the price may go up. And what is wrong in the price going up when there is shortage of supply? And when there is an increase in demand, the price also may go up. So there is nothing wrong in the price going up when at time of increased demand, as expressed by some other historical scholars, بكثرة الخلق أو قلة الرزق. So price may go up, and in that case, that does not call at all for imposing.
Law of demand and supply.
Yes, it's the law of demand and supply. There's no reason, that does not give reason for the government to impose prices. And that, of course, applies on all prices, not only on prices of goods or of consumable goods or agricultural items. It applies on all prices. The market functions, and the market essentially distributes income and determines the prices. And of course enhances supplies when a commodity is demanded in the market. That gives a signal to the suppliers to increase their supply of it. And desirability of taxes, which is mentioned on the market, and so on. So the next institution is, how do we look at wealth and income? In my, I should call it hunch, but it's more than a hunch, really. It is an educated guess. In my educated guess, based on my observation of the Western economies, the concept of mal being, or properties being, covering wealth and income together, is a very important issue in the concentration of wealth in America, for instance. In America, there are more taxes on income. And whenever taxes are imposed, we always look at income. We rarely look at wealth. And when it comes to wealth, wealth is not taxed except in certain circumstances that require the government to provide some services to that wealth. For instance, there is a tax on cars. Well, because you own the road, and I mean, you use the road, and the road are maintained by expenses by the government. But there is no tax, for instance, on all the financial assets that you own, especially these fictitious financial assets, which are huge. The estimation of options in the world in general, and you should notice that more than 80% of that is in America. Estimation of options is at the least something like $800 trillion. That is several multiples, up to 10 multiples of the total production of the whole world. America, over the last 20 years, has been discussing the issue of health insurance. How can we provide health insurance to everybody? They were discussing also the pension system, that after a few years it was expected at the beginning expecting it at the year 22, 23, then extended it to the 30s, 2030, 35, that the Social Security will not be able to pay anymore for the pensioners. So that because of that, they increased the retirement age from 65 to 68. With all these, that economist argued that just impose 5% tax on options. And in his estimation at that time, when he wrote that article, he said that will give us about $30 trillion as tax on the options that are owned, of course, by individuals. And that $30 trillion at that time was almost, the budget of the United States government was 11 trillion. So it was almost 3 times the budget. So he said, you can solve the problem of health insurance. You give health insurance to everybody. You solve the problem of illegal migrants. You give them equal treatment with legal migrants, and you make them legal and give them health insurance. Again, all of them will, and you will not have any public debt anymore by only 5% tax on options. These are not tax. So the concept there is difference. Wealth, we may not touch it unless necessary, or unless we provide services against that tax that we impose on the wealth. But on income, this is where the source of the budget of the United States and UK and other Western countries. Notice zakah is imposed on wealth and income together. What is agricultural product? Agricultural product are income, part of GDP. The production during the year, that's part of GDP, yet this is subject to zakah. Zakah. Which is zakah. Ushur is a version of zakah. When it is in agriculture, we call it ushur, but it is zakah. But it is zakah. This ushur is zakah. The income of business, for instance. What is the income of business? That is the difference between what I have today and what I have yesterday. That difference is subject to zakah. Again, any increment, in other words, all increment on wealth, which are part of savings, they are savings, in fact, accumulated saving during the year, and at the end of the year, they are subject to zakah. And they are subject to zakah, in fact, as income. We do not require that a year should also pass on them. So if you got your income yesterday and today is your zakah time, that the amount you got yesterday is subject to zakah today. Income is subject to zakah like wealth, not only wealth. And in respect to zakah itself at the same rate. In other words, that we do not, in fact, the word amwalihim, khud min amwalihim, and the word mal, as it is mentioned in the Quran repeatedly many times, means both wealth and income, not only wealth alone and income is not included. So this concept is important. Another one in mal, anything that is harmful is not a mal. How can you call a mal a property and in English language you call it goods? Well, in fact, they are bads, not goods. Anything harmful is not considered a mal. And no matter in what hand it is, it has to be destroyed. I mean, nowadays, we do apply that concept in America, for instance, on the illegal drugs. Now, marijuana is being made legal in many states, but leave that aside. In illegal drugs in America today, when they confiscate any drugs with anyone at the airport or in any plant, in any farm or all that, they take that drugs and they burn them, they destroy them. This is exactly what we should do with any harmful thing. For instance, liquors. Liquors are confirmed harmful. There was a study, a long study, took about 20 years and cooperated on between several universities in America. The final result of that study was published this past summer of 2018, and it says the only non-harmful quantity of liquor is 0. Any quantity above 0 is harmful. And from day one, when the Prophet ﷺ was asked by an owner of a caravan, all of it of liquor, he asked him, and it happened that the caravan arrived in Medina shortly after the prohibition, few days after the verse came, فَاجْتَنِبُوهُ. So the man asked the Prophet, what should I do with it? He told him, destroy it, drain it. So, well, how about returning it back to Damascus? Was brought from Damascus boat, a full caravan. He told him, no. How about giving it to our enemies? Send it to Abu Sufyan and let them be drunk with it. He also told him, no. The only way is to drain it. I lose my property. Well, too bad. Your property happened to be something that is harmful. And if it is so, the only way you treat a harmful thing is to just drain it, to destroy it. There's no other way, and the Prophet did not accept any other way. But notice at the same time, that should bring us to the mercy in caring for others, caring and mercy. We care about non-Muslims who live with us, and we tell them, although it is harmful, but because in your religion is not prohibited, you own it, to drink it the way you like, own it the way you like, produce it the way you like. We would not interfere in that. Not because it's not harmful to you, and we like you not to drink, and we prefer that you avoid drinking, definitely. But because your religion accepts it, does not prevent it, we let you, because we care about you only. There's no other reason. In fact, this is kind of not a violation, is a putting on hold our moral standard because we care about these other human beings. They are doing something wrong. Is liquor not harmful for them? It is harmful for them. Anyway, it is they, that is Christian and Jews and atheists, who determined, these scientists who determined that, recently that liquor is harmful. So it is harmful. If it is harmful, anything that is confirmed harmful, we cannot call it property. So it is not even a property, and all that should be done with it is to destroy it. Essentially, and this is repeated in our Sharia many times, essentially, the duty on richness, because of it being wealth, is only zakah. All other things, if we impose any other obligation, it is always circumstantial. That is because of the situation. Because you have children, young children who have no income of their own, you are required to spend on them. Because you got married, you are required. This is, by the way, yani, is not equal spending. Husband and wife have no equal spending on the family in Sharia. It is the husband who is required to spend on his wife fully. As the Quran says it is لِيُنْفِقْ ذُو سَعَةٍ مِّن سَعَتِهِ, in the context of spending on the wife, even under stress circumstances. So that's, we don't want to go into its details, but the idea here is, because of being rich, there is only one thing, the zakah. Because of being rich and live in a society, and the society has a government, and the government has no other resources, we may impose tax on you. Only, so all these other financial duties are circumstantial, and the only one that is not circumstantial, which is based only because you are rich, is the zakah. Nothing else, because of richness itself. Okay? But of course, when we require zakah, or we require other taxes, we need to spend on other things, we take from the rich more than what we take from others to implement the concept of justice. So the legal system, I think we spoke about it in enough way. It is the Islamic economic system is founded on law fulfillment, is founded on abiding by the law, contracting, and fulfillment of contract. Execute the contracts that you did. Law enforcement is very strong, and all the details in our fiqh al-mu'amalat are based on this concept of law enforcement. I mean, this is the whole thing. The justice system. Okay. The state is founded on law, and toward the law, there's no difference between rich and poor, and strong and weak. The statement of Abu Bakr in this regard should be really written in every place, in every government office should be there, that statement. The weak among you is strong in my eye, until I got for him is right, and the strong among you is weak as far as I am concerned, until I got the right from him, if he has any obligation. And the same thing, the rich and the poor. This is, I don't look at these, and all people are equal toward the law. That's very important in building the system. The next institution is the role of state, call it economic activities of the state. The Islamic economic system assigns part of the resources in the economy to the whole society. And of course, the society is administered by the government on behalf of the society. So the government is the one that controls a big chunk of the natural resources in an economy. Sources of energy, rivers, and even the use at mass use, not except individual use of the sun energy or wind energy or others. The mass use of them is also in the hands of the government. Minerals are also in the hands of the government, according to majority of fiqh, our fiqh, classical and today, the all minerals, whether they are above ground or underground, whether they are solid or liquid, are owned by the whole society and should be only controlled by the government.
So
Of
it's
course,
not recast, as they say recast, and you have to pay only 5%.
no, it's not an issue of the rikaz, which is part of zakah, form of zakah, applies only to buried wealth, not to natural resources. So buried wealth, if a buried wealth is found, then 20% on it becomes part of zakah under the name of rikaz, and the remaining is owned by the owner of that land. But the minerals, even, I mean, it's clear in the Maliki school, it's even stated that way, that any mineral that is found beneath the land that is owned privately is owned by the society, not by the owner of that land. So you own the surface, you don't own what is under it.
Public property.
It's public property. So what is assigned as public properties are well defined, and they make a major source of revenues for the public budget, which should replace taxes. And we reach taxes only under necessity.
Public property are not state property.
Well, they are not state, they are owned by the society, but controlled by the government.
Managed by government.
Managed, that is,
By the-
managed by the government, of course. Government is the administrator of the society.
Yeah.
Okay. So the government in the Islamic economic system exists in the market as producer, as consumer, as administrator generally, and as also protector of private property and private ownership. Is it necessary in the Islamic economic system? Yes. The Islamic economic system does not go by the anarchy approach. It requires existence of government in the society that administers its economic aspects. Okay, the next one is the ethical monitor. The ethical monitor in the Islamic system is built in the heart of people on one hand, but also it is built in two other schemes that exist in the system. In the law as one scheme. The law, of course, the Islamic law is all based on moralities, on the ethical values. In the heart, you find, I mean, in our societies, especially those that became Muslim many years ago, centuries, even a beggar, what does a beggar say in any street when he begs? He says, Min malillah. Right? In all Muslim societies, he said, Min malillah. So what you are giving me is from malillah, not from you. It's I mean, it's part of our culture. Let begging aside, but the idea that when you give min malillah, and when you see some other person, you say, no, I wouldn't do that if it is something wrong. But the inner monitor that tells you don't do this or do that. You see a poor guy, you have tendency to help him. And that is part of our religion, part of the teaching that is inherited generation after generation. It is not the idea that is expressed. It represents really the capitalist system, especially with Trump approach. The verse 47 in Surah Yasin that says, when they were called on, to give to the poor, to help the poor and needy, they said, should we feed those whom God could have fed if he so wishes? Well, of course, God could have fed them. But God told us also that this life all is a test. So the inculcation of the idea that we should give the poor, we should help the person who needs help. يعني أنا الحمد لله I don't need help to stand from when I am in the mosque praying and stand to go up. But even يعني here in the mosque I find a couple of students running to me when I want to get up after prayer, running to me to help me to hold my hand and here and there. I don't need that as a matter of fact, but really I do feel that these young boys have that feeling in their heart. So this is the internal monitor. This is the internal monitor that we raise, which you don't find in most rigor capitalist views.
Originating from Iman.
Of course, it comes based on that faith, on Iman, on the teaching we got since we are young of Rahmah. Now, we must say also, there are many people also, it's a human thing. The Rahmah in the heart of people is a human thing. But the Iman, as Professor Arif says, raises it, nourishes it, increases it, makes it a vivid monitor, a vivid internal monitor. Okay, what's his name, this Algerian scholar? Malik bin Nabi. In one of his books, he said that a story about here in Istanbul. I don't know where did he got it from, but anyway, he narrates that story in one of his books. He said a woman stood in the hall of a bank, in the hallway of a bank, shouting, "Why did you add this money to my account? This is dirty money, this is faiz, I don't want it. Why did you add it?" And she was objecting very harshly. "Why did you put this money in my account? Take it away." Although, think of it, any capitalist person, you are giving your money and you reject it, you are becoming richer and you don't like it, well, it looks irrational to them, but definitely, and this is why many Muslims refuse to take privileges from conventional banks on interest basis because of that, and they remain more moderate in their wealth practices and economic activity because they refuse always to deal with the interest, and that is the internal monitor. But this internal monitor is supported by the Sharia, by the law itself, and also supported by a midway institution, this Hisba and the community prayer, and even in community prayer, people don't like to pray beside one who is ribawi, who is murabi. They like to stay away from him, even that. So that affects community feeling and the Hisba in the market. The Hisba is not a part of the law. It's an institution that helps moral practices in the market, help monitor things in the market before they reach the law, before they reach court. So this ethical monitor is very important. Of course, the basic foundation of it is a human, exists in all hearts of all human beings. But as Dr. Arif said, the faith, the Iman increases it a lot. The other two parts do not exist. I always call that in the financial markets today, in New York, for instance, we need an ombudsman. Ombudsman يعني محتسب. We need a muhtasib. And if we had muhtasib at the time of the crisis of 2009, definitely we would not have to have reached that depth in the crisis. It could have been taken care of at an early stage. But because we don't have muhtasib, okay, each thing we look at it, oh, that's his freedom, that's his freedom, that's his freedom for this bank or that bank doing things. And then we reach, by practicing this freedom in the wrong channels, we reach sometimes the crisis. And this is exactly what happened in the crisis of 2009. and aid. So these monitors are needed, are necessary for any healthy society. The last one is mercy and care. In principle, it exists. Islamic system, it is more emphasized. This institution is emphasized to the extent that part of it is made obligatory. There's no other system in the world, including now the good systems of what they call them welfare payment and all these. Well, these are definitely good improvement in the Western system, and unfortunately they are better as they are today than what exists in any Muslim country. This is very unfortunate. We should be ahead of them in that, but we are underdeveloped in everything, even in our minds. So the mercy and caring is very, very important. The minimum of it is made as zakah, but historically, all Muslims went a lot beyond that minimum. And if you look at the Quran, zakah is mentioned something like 28 times or maybe 30 times the way you count it. Zakah nafs قد تكون, you may add it as part of it, but even if you don't add it, so you reach 28 times. But charity is mentioned 167 times, a lot more than zakah. And historically, Muslims gave through the concept of awqaf, which is charity with a continuous current, and through the concept of charity, sadaqat directly, they have done a lot more than the zakah itself. So these putting them together will create a redistribution of wealth, which is very important. The awqaf system, for instance, was specialized in educating the poor. You know, education is power. And when you educate the poor, the other thing also that awqaf did is to make the ulama, all of them, independent from government. Take their salaries, their income from awqaf. So you have ulama independent and the poor is educated. Historians say that awqaf was able to create a dynamic in the Muslim society that always turn around the poor into power. So you find poor people becoming rich, becoming rulers, becoming government, becoming in the upper policy making, and because of education, and they started from poor at one time, and it was early.
Empowering poor people.
Yeah, empowering the poor. At one time, early in the Islamic history, the Khalifa, Hisham ibn Abdul Malik, asked, who is the big scholar of this city? He was given a name. The other city was giving a name. Another city was giving a name. He said, gosh, all these are yesterday's slaves. They were from the slaves who were liberated. Their parents, all of them were slaves from the conquered land. And they were, given freedom, and they were educated. And what made them leaders? Education. So awqaf focused on education. In fact, to the extent that if you make a waqf without specifying its objective, it goes to education, not to the poor and needy. It goes to education. Yani the de facto of awqaf objective is education. So the idea here is we created in the Muslim society through these teachings that came originally from the Prophet ﷺ and from the Quran. We created a society that has these dynamics of really taking care of the poor. Taking care not only of the poor, we have awqaf for the animals, and even awqaf for the wild animals in the mountains. So we take care of the whole environment through the awqaf. I have a couple of points only. I will not go through them, just will mention the idea only. Of course, the main thing that describes an economic system, in my opinion, is its institutions. And this is what we discussed. But these institutions, where do they come from? They come from the pillars of that system, like oneness of God, accountability, the importance, the abiding by the message, and the concept of vicegerency and the concept of worship. These are more pillars, more philosophical. You may look at them sometimes as even metaphysical. That's okay, but these are the basic philosophical foundation of the system. But also you need a third thing, which is the behavioral guidelines, the practices, how the operations in the system are done. This is also important, and these are quickly roving in the earth with full freedom, detailed law and ethical norms in full details. Who said Sharia is the Islamic law? It's not only the Islamic law, it's the Islamic law and Islamic ethics and Islamic practices all. So it's not only the law, because it talks, our Sharia talks very often about the makruh and the desired, the mandub and the makruh. What are the mandub and makruh? These are not laws. These are behavioral things purely. So they are always implanted in the system. So these details, and then of course all human beings are equal, regardless of religion. As a matter of fact, regardless of religion, many people they think otherwise, which is incorrect, not an Islamic thing. Balance between private ownership and public ownership, and lastly, or not lastly, really, it's a positive, active role of the government in the economy, and the tools of mercy and caring, zakat, charity, and awqaf. Of course, in today's world, we have NGOs based essentially on charity. Then in mal, that issue of harmful things. Harmful deserves to be destroyed all the time. So these are relate more to the behavior of the system. With that, I thank you very much. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen.
Thank you, Ustaz.
Thank you, Prof. Monzer for this beneficial presentation. Now we open the session for question and answer. Whoever has a question, you are most welcome to ask the Prof.
Yeah.
We will answer in full detail. Prof.
Yeah, thank you very much, Ustaz. I believe that you very well organized the system, how the system is functioning. And of course, I am trying to check my knowledge and then learn, not criticizing. Right? And we have some points which we are not common. For example, yes, zakat is a general explanation in Islam to clean your wealth. But zakat also is a tax. And there are three main taxes in Islam. Zakat is taxes, taken from capital, which is for 1 year after 1 year, monetary or other capital, and then from livestock, which are grazed at public land or public property land, and ushur is 1/10 from agricultural goods, not from income, is defined by real values. Humus is taken from industrial and miners and petrol, which are from on world or under the ground. It is 50%. And humus is income of the central state. Ushur is income of the provinces, and zakat is a taxes which for local community is divided in 8 parts. Thank you for this. As we will discuss later on. I want to make
Yeah, thank you very much.
it's my limited knowledge.
Thank you very much. Yani, I think we need to put this in the perspective of the system and taking all the text into consideration. Usher and zakah on livestock and zakah on other items of wealth are not income to the state, province, or federal, or central, or local. They have their own usage that cannot be to others and cannot be given to others. For instance, it is in all schools of fiqh. You cannot use zakah to build a mosque. And yet building a mosque is one of the major